Hi again, everyone. Welcome to the Illinoize podcast. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. I write the political newsletter called The Illinoize, which you can read every day at theillinoize.com. That's ILLINOIZE.com. Coming up on our show today, we'll spend some time doing a deep dive into the trial of the so-called ComEd 4. If you haven't been paying attention, this is the first arm of the case involving former House Speaker Michael Madigan. It involves former Commonwealth Edison CEO Ann Pramaggiore, lobbyists John Hooker and Jay Doherty, and the man accused of being kind of a bag man for Madigan, former state representative and retired lobbyist Mike McLean. We'll get into some more of it with Jon Seidel of the Chicago Sun-Times in a few minutes. But I wanted to take an opportunity to share a couple of the wiretaps that have been played so far. We're recording this on Friday, March 24th, so we haven't seen the extent of the government's case, but it is surely shocking to hear Madigan, who's this slightly mythical South Side Irish Wizard of Oz for so many years, caught on federal wiretaps. Not going to play them all. Subscribers will get more of the details next week. But I wanted to play a few of the comments caught by the G for you. We did a couple of editing to shorten some of these clips, so they're not fully what the feds presented, and we bleeped out a couple of not so nice words. The first clip shows the power that Madigan swayed using McLean. It involved former Democratic Representative Lou Lang, who was accused of sexual harassment in 2018, and Madigan seemingly used McLean to push Lang out of office.
So I was going to call you anyway. I was going to wait. I thought today's not a slow day for you, huh?
Oh, it's been crazy around here.
Has it? Okay. So when do you want me to call Lang and just lower the boom on him?
I think
because he's not getting it.
Oh.
I mean, he understands it, but he doesn't like hearing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Sooner rather than later.
Okay. I'll do it.
Now, Mike, I presume that there's this one woman who has allegedly told Lang that if he gets reappointed to leadership, she's going to go public.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get that confirmed that she made the call. Heather's the one that told me that. And so Heather has called her again yesterday, but she's walking out in the suburbs for one of our candidates.
Okay.
So she's not answering her phone. But as soon as I get that confirmed, I'm just going to flat out tell Lou I know about this call. I want to confirm that call's been made.
Yep. Yeah, I would say sooner rather than later.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you. Bye.
This conversation is between McLean and Representative Lou Lang at the time, where McLean basically tells Lang that Madigan wants him out.
So this is no longer me talking. I'm an agent, somebody that cares deeply about you, who thinks that you really ought to move on.
So that tells me that person is no longer interested in moving me up in leadership, right?
That's right.
And I would never embarrass him that way, although I must say I do believe that all of that is bullshit. But in the environment in which we are today, it doesn't really matter if it's bullshit or not, does it?
No. I mean, you handled that first claim. But also, I think you and I as lawyers would say she did a pitiful job also. I mean, just pitiful. And so it helped with discredit her and credentialize you. But I don't know, this next gal, maybe she does a better job, and it's all of a sudden, then it's, he fired his chief of staff of over 25 years. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Things he uses Cousineau for certain things. He uses me for certain things, and there's no reason with your skill set why he won't use you for certain things.
And do you think he would be helpful to me in business procurement?
Oh, yes. But I also want to tell you that I don't think you're going to have a hard time.
Well, I don't either. You were not aware of this when we met, Mike?
This all came about since you and I talked. At that point, he was just worried about you because, we all hear rumors and stuff like that, and he was just concerned about maybe after 3 decades, it's a good time for you to go make a buck. But he wasn't, it wasn't like Mike. Now you got to tell him that he's just not going to get in leadership. And now if he goes on the dark side after that, he's embarrassed and he's weakened. Whereas if he leaves before, like the caucus votes or the I'm elected speaker, he leaves with strength. And I guess this gal is claiming that she's not going public unless you're in leadership.
Well, all right, so that's something I'll have to consider. But more important than what she has to say is what he has to say. And,
right.
I hear you. So I'll give some more thought to this. I appreciate you leveling with me. It wasn't really my plan for my future, but the caucus is important to me, and I would I wouldn't do anything to damage my speaker or my caucus.
Right.
He's been very good to me, and I'm not going to do anything nasty to him. So let me think about this. I think I know where it will end up going. It's hard for me to get my arms around that decision because, I put a lot of my life into our caucus.
Oh. The dark side, by the way, is a reference to becoming a lobbyist. That call was November 8th, 2018. Lang resigned from the General Assembly just a couple of days before the new General Assembly was sworn in 2 months later. He is currently a lobbyist. So we haven't gotten deep into the Fed's case and specifically the ComEd part of the case, which prosecutors are expected to roll out over the next few weeks, which brings us to our guest. And one of the people in the courtroom for the good and the bad and the ugly of all of this trial has been Jon Seidel, the great criminal courts reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. John, I wanted to bring you in to kind of walk through where we are on this trial thus far, because I think, the politicos like me look at this solely through a lens of Mike Madigan. Right. I guess to start with, what is criminal about what is alleged to be criminal about what kind of seems like a lot of horse trading or trying to curry favor with a politician, which Lord knows anybody that's ever lobbied or tried to get in touch with politicians has tried to curry favor in somehow. So where does the line blur between politics and criminality?
Well, according to the feds, according to the indictment, how it became criminal is that they engaged in these influence schemes, such as paying associates of Mike Madigan through intermediaries, or engaging this law firm of Madigan ally Victor Reyes, that they did these things with the intent to influence Michael Madigan as legislation was moving through the state house, this EMA bill and this FIJA bill. And defense attorneys were very clear. What they wanted the jury to keep, the ball they want the jury to keep their eye on is any connection between the two, any connection between some of these payments or bribes and the legislation at issue. And we're still watching for that evidence.
That's the other thing here, and we'll kind of get into some of the more details of it here. But a lot of this case, from what I'm, and I haven't been in the courtroom obviously, but a lot of what we understand this case to be is very much circumstantial. There's no smoking gun on Mike Madigan, on Ann Parmajor, John Hooker, Jay Doherty. You can maybe say that Mike McLean said some things that incriminate him a little bit, but there doesn't seem to be a smoking gun here. So how are they making that case?
They're making it slowly and methodically, which is what they do. So look, we're about 2 calendar weeks, 6 days of testimony into what the government has said is their case. It's going to take them 4 weeks to put together. Every little bit of this matters. It's true. So far, we have been hearing horse trading and raw politics, as one defense attorney claimed, and I don't think clear connections have been drawn yet. But 3 of the biggest witnesses in this case have yet to take the stand. We're still expecting to hear from Juan Ochoa, who who Michael Madigan worked to install on the ComEd board of directors. We are still expecting to hear from Ed Moody, the former recorder of deeds, who was apparently the recipient of some of this money. And we've yet to hear from Fidel Marquez, who was a former VP at ComEd, who was approached by the FBI in January 2019 and wired up against his colleagues. And I really think that the recordings that Fidel Marquez made are going to be crucial here. Say what you will about the Victor Reyes contract or Juan Ochoa. He recorded these defendants, at least McLean, Hooker, and Doherty, discussing the arrangement through which ComEd paid Jay Doherty's firm, and through which Jay Doherty then paid the likes of Frank Olivo, Ray Nice, the former alderman Mike Zaleski, and I feel like there's one name that's unfortunately escaping me. I know Eddie Acevedo's name. Ed Moody. I'm sorry, Ed Moody was the other. And we're going to hear them talking about doing so in order to keep Michael Madigan happy. And I think those recordings are going to be really crucial to proving that connection between trying to influence Madigan and the payments. And don't forget, this is it, and it's hard to remember sometimes, this is not Michael Madigan's trial. They're focused on what these 4 people were doing, what they were trying to do, and what the intent of these payments were for.
Well, and I think that's the thing people are and I'm probably guilty of this too, because I've worked in politics for all these years. I look at it through a political lens, but that's the heart of the alleged crime here, is that these are lobbyists, are business people who are alleged to have committed bribery, essentially in terms to help their business, right? That's where we come down on.
Yeah, no, it is. And look, the 2 bills at issue, we've heard testimony from ComEd executives that ComEd was on the brink of bankruptcy in the early odds. They were preparing bankruptcy affidavits at the time. They needed to get this legislation passed. And look, the defense will point out that there was a massive lobbying effort to get this legislation passed. No one was behaving as though Michael Madigan was in their pocket. And I do think it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to come down to how the jury is instructed. And once we see how all the evidence comes in, and once we see the defense case as well. But, I was thinking a little bit about this testimony from Will Cousineau yesterday about how he was sent by Michael Madigan to take one of these bills, the Future Energy Jobs Act in 2016, which apparently Cousineau had deduced did not have the votes to pass. Madigan sent him out to make sure it went from a bill that would fail to a bill that would pass. And that's interesting that he did that. I'm sure that's going to come up, but I'm trying to factor in how that plays in, because again, this is not Madigan's trial. And I think that there are a couple of ways that could come in, but one thing that I was thinking about was in a moment like that, when the significant bill for ComEd is on the brink of failure, where did these defendants want Michael Madigan to be on them? Did he want them? Did they want him to be someone who was indifferent to the bill? Did they want him to be somebody who would be happy to see their bill fail? Or did they want him to be somebody who would work to get that bill passed? Now, look, there were political forces at work with that bill. And the jurors, at least, have been told that this was very good public policy for Illinois. So there were other reasons for Michael Madigan to move on this. But again, when it comes to Michael McLean, Ann Pramaggiore, John Hooker, and Jay Doherty, why were they making sure that the speaker's allies were taken care of? I wonder if we'll hear an argument that it was because of moments like that.
I also, and maybe this is more just a how the clock's run on time sort of question, but you've got 4 defendants in this case. They're on trial at the same time, but they're all running sort of separate defenses. Does that make it clunky? Does that make it harder for the jury to understand the defense? What, as you're seeing these four different defense attorneys essentially get up and try and dispute the government's witnesses, how are these cases being? Are they being defended with the same message, or is it just kind of a strewn out different set of arguments?
So far, they seem to largely be coordinated on the same page. That could change. At the end of the day, each of these defense attorneys, you're right, they've got to look out for their own client's best interest. And if the argument that could save Mike McLean for conviction runs contrary to the argument that could save Anne Pramaggiore, I mean, those defense attorneys, they're going to have to do what they're going to have to do, right? But so far, I think we've seen a very coordinated effort by the defense. Sometimes we see Patrick Cotter, who represents Michael McLean, do the heavy lifting and cross-examination. Other times we see Scott Lazar and others. Where one of these attorneys will cover ground that applies to all of the defendants, and then other attorneys will come up and pick up a few of the extra pieces there, whatever's left. But I do think generally the message from all four defendants has been, this was politics, this was lobbying. And look, it can be raw and it can be difficult to listen to. And sometimes you're not going to like how it sounds, but this is the real world that we're dealing with. And also that about a half a dozen jobs, when you're talking about Victor Reyes, Juana Choa, Olivo, Nice, Moody, and Zaleski, amid this massive effort to get this bill passed, these are not the things that are going to put somebody like Michael Madigan in your pocket.
What has the reaction been in the courtroom or in response to the wiretaps? And I know we've only scratched the surface on those, but I listened to some of that and some of the ball breaking language, and it's like, anyone who's ever worked on a campaign, half of your conversations in a day sound like a threat. So it's not necessarily like a, if you're on the inside, it maybe doesn't seem that bad, but these jurors aren't political people. So how, what's the reaction? What have you seen in response to these?
It depends who you're talking to. And of course, when you're in the courtroom, you're not supposed to be reacting that much. Look, again, like you said, I hear from people in politics who are very fascinated to get this insider view or perspective of what really went on in these meetings. We heard a meeting with Madigan and Cousineau and McLean discussing House leadership late in 2018. So they're just kind of fascinated by that. The defense, and the people who are there in support of them, I think they're well aware of what's going to come out. So they're not hearing these for the first time. But what really matters is the jury, right? And the jurors, I think they've done a very good job of just kind of like staying neutral, taking it all in. But I do think they're engaged. I was talking to people earlier today about how there was there was a moment earlier this week when Scott Lazar was going through the passage of EMA and FIJA and absolutely doing his job as a defense attorney, but boring certain people to tears. And not the jury. I looked over at the jury though, and there was one juror in particular who was taking very close notes on everything that he was saying. Others were kind of seemed to be locked in. So I think they're still with us. I think they're taking it in. But I also wonder, as someone who's aware of the process, I've been down in Springfield. I've covered politics, not like you, but I've done it, and I'm aware of how this stuff works. And so I'm aware that this is just kind of how politics operates. This is the real world. But are they thinking that? Are they realizing that this is normal politics? Or are they thinking, man, what a bunch of crooks and they've got to go to jail? Just because they're not familiar with how this process works, and it can be ugly. And Patrick Cotter said as much in his opening statement. that's what I'm wondering. Which side of this, as they're thinking about this, are they, this is all politics, or this is all, terrible, and we don't want, the legislature run like this? I'm not sure.
We've seen a couple of former legislators, Lou Lang and Scott Drury, were called to the stand. A current rep, Bob Rita, has been called to the stand. You mentioned Will Cousineau, who's one of the world famous Madigoons, that was kind of very active on the government and political side. What has been to you the most fascinating, most compelling testimony so far?
Most compelling testimony so far. I mean, at the early, you mentioned Lou Lang, and he testified early in the trial. And, we heard, I mean, that had to be a very embarrassing moment for Lou Lang, who had to get on the stand and sit there as everyone in the courtroom, and then therefore,
and anyone who's ever met Lou Lang knows he's a very proud guy.
Right. And these recordings, we heard them in the courtroom, and now they're out there in public, and you hear Michael Madigan and Michael McLean discussing how, it's time for this guy to go, because there had been an allegation against him before. He was cleared of it, but apparently there was somebody else who was threatening to go public. And you're listening to Michael Madigan and Michael McLean talk about how, I think Madigan said, "I don't see how this guy goes on." And Michael McLean asked, "When do you want me to lower the boom on Lou Lang?" And Michael Madigan says, "Sooner or later." And Lou Lang, as you know, was not a backbencher. Lou Lang had been with the legislature for, I believe, a couple of decades, and was a member of the leadership team. And we heard on the stand that Lou Lang actually aspired to be Speaker of the House one day. And when it was time for him to go, it wasn't Michael Madigan who called him and asked him to please step down. It was Michael McLean who called him and said, "I'm acting as an agent, as somebody who cares about you." And when Lou Lang realized that Michael McLean was talking on behalf of Speaker Madigan and telling him, it's time, your career's at an end, and Lou Lang just accepting that was pretty powerful. For the purposes of the trial, it showed that Lou Lang understood that Michael McLean spoke for Michael Madigan. And then also to just watch Lou Lang sit there on the witness stand as this was all played. As you said, he's very proud, and he could not have been very happy about this. And he actually had a testy exchange with Patrick Cotter, who said something along the lines of Lou Lang had been facing sexual harassment charges, and that's when
and Cotter is McLean's attorney.
McLean's attorney brought up these, said sexual assault charges, something along that line, and Lou Lang got very upset and said he was not facing sexual assault charges, and that he resented the accusation and the implication. So even though that was a week ago, that was a very powerful moment early on, I think, in this trial.
And again, from the outside, I think, a lot of us, when we talk about these horse trading things, the conversations and fights that have gone over, the Blagojevich trial is a great way to point to that, where they say this is political horse trading. I was trying to benefit politically from this appointment, even though there's no Mike Madigan saying, "I've got this thing and it's bleeping golden" on tape. It seems fascinating to me, and I can let you go on this, that this is going to be, in my estimation, a tough haul for the prosecutors over the next couple of weeks of this trial, to show exactly how the law was broken, where there was a bribe, who, how giving somebody an appointment that they may or may not have been qualified for, or whatever, how that reached the level of criminality. I'm really fascinated to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks. What are you expecting? What are you hearing in terms of how these are going to play out over the next couple of weeks?
I mean, I'm going to be watching for the same thing. And, I think I mentioned it before. I think where we really kind of get to the meat of this is I think Ed Moody will be important, although I'm sure the defense will have heavy cross-examination for him. But again, those recordings that Fidel Marquez made, that I think that's where the investigators felt that they clinched the case, and that's where I think it will, where it will likely all come together for the government. One other quick point that I'd make, I mean, you're right. This is important for the government to put this together. It's going to be a lot of work for them. This whole case is count 2 of Madigan's indictment, and you don't get to see very often a preview of a trial. And you mentioned Blagojevich, who of course wound up having 2 trials. This kind of gives the feds a practice run at some of this before they take Madigan to trial. I think that's also a very interesting aspect of this too. And it's way down the road, but if Madigan does go to trial, it'd be interesting to see if there are any adjustments made as a result of this trial.
Jon Seidel from the Chicago Sun-Times. Follow him on Twitter at Seidel Content. It's been great stuff. If you're interested in this trial, even as a Politico or just somebody interested in the real life law and order stuff. So, Jon, thanks so much. I appreciate you taking some time. I know you've got crazy weeks during all of this, so thanks for sitting down with us for a few.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, that'll wrap it up for today. This trial will continue for at least another month or so, but Madigan's trial, of course, doesn't start until sometime next year. So stay tuned, as they say. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Illinoize podcast. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. We'll talk to you again next time.